My name is Marlene Streeruwitz and I'm a writer. I was invited to talk about artificial intelligence. I'm a writer since I'm able to write. But I started to publish in the 80s with plays which were played all over Germany, France, Switzerland, not in Austria. And since 1996, I started publishing novels. And since then, I wrote 13 novels. And the last one deals with the coronavirus. And to write, the German title of this last novel is "This is What the World Has Become." And it strikes me as interesting that writing while being engulfed in a strange and dark situation, being constrained by the state because of the coronavirus crisis, I used the term world and not life. But then, this last novel is different from those before it. As it was written under circumstances that were totally unknown, the writing itself seemed very different from the detached process that novel writing usually is for me. Writing in a new situation meant a double immersion. The act of writing is by nature an encompassing situation. To be under lockdown and held in total isolation because of the coronavirus is just as encompassing and in hindsight. Meanwhile, in the second lockdown, with a nighttime curfew, we are already building on the experience we gained during the first one. Living in the current situation is something we've had to learn, and I sort of feel a little bit more grown up than I did during the spring lockdown. I certainly hope that I am. But in hindsight, being totally deprived of other people, of other contexts last spring, it was necessary to create an inner something to resort to for guidance through these new times that were in a passive way so daunting. And that is already like writing a novel. And artificial intelligence is developed by means of the same technique, only it works the other way around. Artificial intelligence is a literary invention. And here, by literary, I mean texts of a narrative nature invented by individual persons, as opposed to mandatory texts intended for collective audiences and that are, for the most part, anonymous compilations, sometimes having a name. The Bible is one example of this. And we always have to remember that these texts are used as textbooks for the development of society, of its culture, and of the power that exists within. These texts are there to stave off all fears and anxieties about death and the extinction of the individual. It is the promise of eternal life that makes these texts so powerful and so useful to power. In a way, every text, and I mean every text, is a record of the fear of death. And we put something in writing to preserve the message. Writing is in itself preservation, an overcoming of the passage of time, a marking in time in the hope of getting rid of time and its continuous passage. Every text is therefore a testament to the hope of eternal life, a testament to the hope of being able to escape death. Now, a shopping list may not be written with that intent, but found somewhere, the shopping list is evidence of the life of the person who wrote it. Texts, personal texts, the texts of persons who can be named, these texts are always this kind of evidence of life. When a doctor writes a report, for a moment, he or she becomes the author of this other life that is being written down. Our culture is based on text. Research into artificial intelligence aims at nothing less than basing invented life on text. Of course, writing down tomatoes doesn't seem to require much ingenuity. Tomatoes, bread for toast, ham, cucumber, whipping cream, croissants. But think what different objectives such a list could have. You might want to prepare sandwiches, ham and tomato, cucumber sandwiches, and whipped cream you have for the cake you've baked. And you've got everything you need for an invitation to an English afternoon tea. You could make pasta with the tomatoes, the ham and the cream, add some frozen peas, and you've got a meal the kids will devour. Perhaps you want to have a cucumber salad with it. Perhaps you keep the cucumber in the fridge like I always do. I usually remember to use the cucumber too late. I had to make up my mind not to buy any cucumber anymore because I always waste them. My reality and my expectations do not overlap. Especially in these times of isolation, no one drops by the house, so there's no need for emergency sandwiches at the moment. Nevertheless, I have great difficulty not buying cucumbers. Obviously, the process of aligning reality with one's own wishes and expectations is a long drawn-out learning experience, an experience that never ends. And the items on our shopping list could be just the ones needed at the last minute for a buffet for 20 people. They could be provision for a single person who keeps a well-stocked fridge. They could be meant for breakfast in a boarding school. Our secularized texts, and let us remember for a moment that writing, in historical terms, is a very new thing as a tool for everyone in everyday life. Writing is still not a universal tool. Let us remember that talking about artificial intelligence reveals the unbelievable rift in living conditions that exist throughout the world. Artificial intelligence is the outcome of all Western culture, thinking and research, but does not reflect it. Computing uses universal languages. We human beings cannot do anything without being what we are and what we become through the long learning process of growing up. We are culturally formed beings. All we are, all we express, is based on the culture we grew up in. Our very being is culturally formed, and this includes our bodies. And from the beginning to the end of our lives, the learning process goes on, with both body and mind evolving. Very intricate processes are at work. We are diachronic beings and always changing. And if you read an entry in your diary from a year ago, you might not recognize yourself. This ever-shifting of our bodies and minds, an immense amount of data is piled up. We are our own huge and unbelievably complex archives. Our shopping list. Let's talk about intent. At first sight, this list is just a list. But in context, the list could simply be a reminder that these items need to be bought. In addition to the items on the list, the person who is shopping heaps loads and loads of other things into the shopping cart as well. The list might be a written instruction. It might be an order. It could be a reminder for someone else to buy the groceries. This other person would have to know when the groceries were wanted or needed. The stability of all kinds of relationships might depend on the fulfillment of the intention, which is that these groceries are to be bought. The motive of the empty refrigerator comes to my mind. Comedy and drama, in films and novels, the empty refrigerator illustrates the whole life of the owner of the refrigerator. Thus, in the crime novels of Sarah Paretsky, V.I. Warshawski's empty fridge expresses the kind of woman the heroine is. For her nourishment, V.I. Warshawski depends on her downstairs neighbor. She herself is too busy sleuthing and following leads. She has no time to take care of herself. Her empty refrigerator symbolizes her emancipation from any housewifely femininity and emphasizes her professionalism. She pursues one aim, finding out the truth. Finding out the truth is not just a job, it is a vocation. And in this, V.I. Warshawski follows on the footsteps of all the Herculeses and Percivals of our cultural canon. Here, it is epic poetry that Sarah Paretsky is writing, and we can derive this from the fact that a shopping list can be high literature. Imagine, if you collected all shopping lists you wrote, you had ever written, you would be looking at your biography. Of course, you would have to translate the shopping list text into a narrative in order to make yourself understood. You yourself. If you went through your compilations of shopping lists, you would instantly know and remember. This instant knowledge and memory emerges from the archive that we are to ourselves. This archive is not fully usable. Our unconscious censors our memory, but we could decide to undergo analysis and work on remembering more clearly. We could then fully understand our shopping lists. But in order to tell the story of your life to someone else, you would have to put all your reactions into language. Your memories include pictures in your mind and feelings in your body that now have to be told. That is how translation works. In this case, the translation would be transformative. You would decipher the shopping list text and put it into context. The shopping list would help you to remember the various situations. And let us point out, no two shopping lists are the same. Every shopping list is different. Even if you order your groceries online, you always start from your standing orders and then go from there. It is debatable which text represents the difference, the new shopping list or the standing order. It seems to me that this is one of the crucial questions to be decided in connection with artificial intelligence. Which kind of representation will constitute the basis for modeling in an artificial intelligence project? Need or deficiency? And here we are already within the confines of philosophy. Within a religious framework of thinking, there would be rules at our disposal. Though history has taught us that bias also rules these frameworks, ambivalence towards the basic decision on how to fashion an artificial model is unavoidable. The fact that it is people who write these texts and even the mathematically based programming language bear the marks of the thinking and feeling of the authors of these languages. And just as no shopping list resembles another, although all shopping lists are shopping lists, no life resembles another, although all lives are lives. Artificial intelligence looks for similarities to define life. Persons write shopping lists, would be said there. It's the shopping lists that are life and not the groceries that a person needs in order to eat. It is humbling to observe the process of reduction of redundancy in modeling for artificial intelligence. The redundancy in the present example would be the necessity to eat, as artificial intelligence requires energy but no groceries. In order to build a technical assistant that helps in stoking the refrigerator, the algorithms need to be able to write lists or orders. The actual content that the lists indicate would be secondary. Such a virtual assistant should provide us with information about the content of the refrigerator and then check back with us regarding the shopping list. Planning ahead, learning what is needed and what is desired, that would be the next step. And this is the step where the bias comes into play. Machines narrow down tasks in order to manage them. And the way this narrowing down takes place brings to the fore the bias that is encoded in machine translation. The whittling down of information to its very core. Translation programs teach us again what we should have learned from primary school grammar. The basic grammatical building blocks in our natural languages are subject and predicate. It's amusing to observe how we are reverting to the infinitive to express ourselves to someone who doesn't speak our language. Of course, English lends itself much more readily to simplification. artificial intelligence will continue to prefer English, but the idea of whittling down information to its very core requires more elaboration, and just what whittling down and core mean. Again, we encounter our philosophical problem of what means what and what something means to the individual, to society, and to that society's culture. At one point during the Stanford lecture on machine learning, the lecturer smiles and says that society has to deal with the question of bias. Mathematics has nothing to do with it. But is that so? Artificial intelligence is a translation of natural language into mathematics. And as in the case of every translation, how the translation is done is an ethical question. And in a sense, most of our communication involves some kind of translation. You as medical doctors, for example, translate the body into medical terms, and by whittling down the various possibilities, you arrive at your diagnosis and then translate your findings back into natural language for the patient. In a way, the process of approaching artificial intelligence task is similar to writing a novel. Let us start the novel with shopping list: tomatoes, bread for toasting, ham, cucumber, whipping cream, croissants. One thing can be said from the outset. With this list, we've avoided the question of the first sentence. Whole generations of literary critics were on the lookout for the best first sentence of a novel. As a novelist myself, I find the final sentences more important. I find it the key to how to take leave of the text. What the reader reads just before closing the book. Last sentences should linger on in the mind of the reader. As I see it, the final sentence should end the text but continue echoing in the natural life of the reader. The last sentence should be a device for closing the world of the literary text so the reader can return to his or her own life, but without holding on to any hopes, wishes, or projections out of the text. In my opinion, a literary text must be a complete model, but it has to be a particular model, not a general model. After having solved the exaggerated problem of the first sentence of the novel, we have to decide who wrote the list. And this is where my way of whittling down the information begins. I delete all possibilities until I've arrived at a special, very distinct person whom I make the hero or heroine of the novel. Artificial intelligence would take a different course. Artificial intelligence would whittle all possible personal traits down to a general perception center. We must never forget that artificial intelligence has no body, no awareness or cognition, that it has its aim the formation of a perception center based on data and not on perception. So what I do when I begin a novel and what artificial intelligence tries to achieve are total opposites. Although we have at least one objective in common. But whereas I tell the story of the world through the medium of this one personal life, artificial intelligence aims at actually being the world in one exemplary general model. Pre-modern art aimed in this direction. A pre-modern author would try to invent a hero or heroine for our novel who could incorporate every personal trait common to all persons sharing the same condition of life and having the same gender status as those of the hero or heroine figure. Let us halt at this point. Could artificial intelligence possibly be a pre-modernist trick? If so, all our philosophical questions would be answered already. But if artificial intelligence is given free rein in learning, could artificial intelligence make its way into our second modernism with all we have achieved with regard to sensibilities and politics? But we have not yet decided on our heroine or hero who begins the novel by writing this shopping list. In literature, we have to decide on a gender. We cannot form a conception of a person without gender. And with this question, we again come to the question of bias. In literature, I could write gender blind, but in my own mind, For every novel I write, I have to develop an agency that stands between me and the text. Otherwise, I would write endless diaries. It is the forming of this agency that in its turn forms the perception center of the figure in the novel. I write in second modernity. One could argue that I already find myself in a third. Accordingly, I follow a phenomenology of perception. The one figure of the novel is presented in a stream of consciousness. I focus through the agency of novel writing on this one fictional person and invent all fictional perception, falling back on my own personal perception and the possibilities thereof. So I have to conceive of the person as being gendered, although I may not divulge that in the text. As a writer, I define myself as critically democratic. That means my intent is to avoid all pre-modern anti-democratic biases in the basic structure of my novel, in those parts where the narrative leaves the stream of consciousness and gives a description. No nationalisms, no gender biases, no racial biases. I follow a nice anti-fascist thought process. On the other hand, the point of view of the fictional figure stays within its own confines, in free speech itself, which could be racist or sexist or whatever. But that means I give a lot of thought to this person's outer world and how power is represented. And then I want to write about these power structures, but without duplicating them. Artificial intelligence would do just that, duplicating them. And if we did not deal with the philosophical aspects of these problems, it might be the duplication takes over. Artificial intelligence must earn its existence. Economy and philosophy do not go well together. We are regularly overwhelmed by technical progress, and that brings a great deal of money to very few people. And the moment artificial intelligence really learns how to learn, the question will be, what constitutes the basis of this learning? What data is used to build up the exemplary archive of exemplary intelligence that artificially understands life and is able to react by asking questions? As I said, the Stanford lecturer just smiled and said that bias was encoded in machine learning because people were biased. But that, he said, was no problem. Perception robotics, he said, was something that was still far away. Since human-level intelligence had so far remained mathematically unachievable, for now machines are able to perform limited tasks like a virtual assistant that can provide us with information and interact with us by asking questions, like our shopping list example. Another question nobody can answer is, what will the territory of artificial intelligence be in the world? Will artificial intelligence be one cosmos and one language? Of course not. That would presuppose a peaceful world with no barriers. So there will be very different models and languages. In my sci-fi novel Norma Desmond, I wrote this short novel in the year 2000. In this novel, artificial intelligence forms programs that fight against each other. These programs have learned only the aggressive traits of human beings. Nowadays, I fear that this literary fiction is not far-fetched, as literary fiction never is. I would vote for a democratic welcome to artificial intelligence and to the preparation of an educational program that we could all go along with. Together, we could decide on a special gender for machines and initiate a research project focusing on gender bias in language. Of course, that would turn everything upside down, and all pre-modernist arguments for gender roles would again make themselves heard. A fight for democratic speech would have to begin. In the final analysis, we ourselves must undertake to learn more about gender sensibility or race sensibility or other kinds of sensibilities if we are to deal with exemplifications of the mind. We need to base our judgment of artificial intelligence on some moral high ground, even when the machine is merely responding to us by asking what to put down on the shopping list. Who knows what might have been the priorities of the person who devised the machine translation? Perhaps he or she had a thing against shopping, and that feature managed to get encoded in the program, and for that reason we find cucumber on every single shopping list, just so that we too will end up hating shopping. In the long run, we never escape the question of right and wrong. Artificial intelligence just poses the question in a different way. Do we deal with life or do we deal with world? Of course, we should deal with life in the world and put all narratives into each other of our respective contexts. If the world is perceived as one sign formed by all narratives, then artificial intelligence has to be carefully conceived if it is to become part of it. But if artificial intelligence is intended to be a partial duplication of man as a replacement for man, then what we have before us is just one more machine with all the ramification that implies. Anyway, I hope we can stay ahead of what is called technical progress and find democratic ways to incorporate these artificial beings, that is, if they should exist at all.